Whether we're talking about gray, beige, or a combination, incorporating neutral paint colors into your color palettes, it's a wonderful way to establish a great base for your home's interior design. And one of my favorite types of neutrals that exist is taupe. I love the way it manages to stay pretty passive altogether, but also bring forth a ton of richness to help add some sophistication and zhuzh to a space. Some taupes are a bit lighter, but Studio Taupe is a lovely example of one that is more rich and substantial. This is a paint color that you will notice, but I think for all the right reasons, rather than the not so right ones. It's by Behr paint, and I also have 3 other Behr paint colors that I picked to go with it, which I will slowly reveal as the video progresses, including a pretty fun accent color near the end. And for all the people watching that are planning to use these paint colors in their home, I'm also going to tell you my 2 best trim and baseboard color options to finish up your project. Welcome back to the Paint People free color advice. Now let's get into it. So like I said, Studio Taupe, it's firmly in that neutral color family, and being a taupe, for anyone that is a little unsure of what that means, it's basically a color that combines brown and gray into a beautiful earthy blend. I love saying earthy. I mean, it kind of feels like it comes from the earth, like stone and soil, that sort of amalgamation of colors. Taupe seems to coordinate with most interior design styles that I've come across. You can kind of think of it as the darker variation of grayish in a way, which is a much lighter color category that I would say is more widely used because of its lightness. That's one thing that Studio Taupe isn't, because it has an LRV of 32. That means it only reflects 32% of the light that hits it in your home when they're on your walls. And this puts it in the kind of dark mid-tone category. I guess you could also interpret it as like a light dark color, but that just sounds kind of weird. I get a touch more of it being sort of a dusty muted brown versus something that's more gray centric, which I think is a plus because it makes it a slightly better fit for those more contemporary, warmer leaning color directions that people are seeming to go in. If you've been interested in interior decorating for a little while, like me, you might have seen the more cool blue leaning grays rise in popularity and then fall back into a more supportive niche use case, usually in bathrooms and bedrooms. That's kind of where I like to put them. Studio Taupe, on the other hand, does incorporate some of that warmth with its brown aspect, but at the same time, it's not bringing like a vibrant gold hot temperature. It's more of a lukewarm type of warmth, just kind of warm. I do see a bit of red hiding in the background as well, and that's fairly common with these gray-brown colors. I could see this being used as an accent wall choice, and even an accent color in general, where you can use it in multiple situations, especially when you're dealing with much lighter colors that share some of the same undertones, which we'll get to in a second with our color pairings. Spoiler. Even though it's a darker color, and you might be a little apprehensive about using a dark color in a room, as long as there's at least a moderate amount of lighting present, Studio Taupe should work just fine in those more secondary or tertiary parts of your home. I've seen a similar color used as a main hallway choice, and I think it worked fine, but that's because there was enough room for the color to breathe, where you don't feel like you're in a giant cavernous tunnel, although that sounds pretty cool. I also enjoy darker taupes on things like kitchen cabinets, but for this one, I would make sure you test it out before you commit, because you want to make sure you nail the undertones in Studio Taupe so they go well with your flooring, especially, but also your backsplash and even your countertops, assuming they're staying. Let's get into the color pairings that I picked for Studio Taupe, and I have quite possibly the perfect light pairing, which is called Taupe Tease. It's a light neutral that just teases you with taupe. And I find that funny because most people assume taupe is always a dark color. Kind of like Studio Taupe, right? It's deep, it's rich, it has depth, but technically you can have colors like Taupe Tease, which give you a light taupe color, or even just calling it light taupe is fine with me. It's kind of like calling pink light red. It sounds kind of weird, but it's kind of true. What I like about Taupe Tease is it seems to share the same rough undertones as Studio Taupe, which makes sense. But the other thing that I've noticed with it is it does introduce just a hint of additional warmth, which is perfect if you were needing this in the more open areas of your home and if you want it to feel a little more positive and inviting with that warmth. I sort of treat this as the primary color of this palette that you can branch off into other colorful directions depending on the room. So this could be a great choice for a hallway, for example. Studio Taupe could be sort of the secondary color. And then you have a color like Dolphin Gray, which is our next color pairing. I sort of see this as the yin to Studio Taupe's yang. And that's because they have a ton in common, but also give you very different looks. Dolphin Gray definitely feels more like a true gray. I guess I could put that in quotes. Virtually having no brown present whatsoever. It's literally just gray. I wouldn't say it's entirely cold though, or overly blue, let's say, which some grays can feel like, but because the other neutrals around it bring that bit of warmth, that bit of brown, it really accentuates the colder aspect in Dolphin Gray. So you almost see a slight complementary dynamic working here when used together. What's fun though is Dolphin Gray and Studio Taupe have identical light reflectance values, which means they're just as dark as one another. Like it's literally the same number. And this means if you have two similar rooms nearby that serve similar purposes, you can have one color in each room and they'll have a similar feel, but a unique look. They're also different enough that if you wanted to have one as the accent to the other, that could be a fun take as well, because instead of playing with two colors that have different levels of darkness, they just have different undertones instead. Let's get to my accent color, which takes things into a much darker direction, and I want to keep things on the warmer side as well here. So I introduced a bit of drama and some deliciousness as well. The color is called Cherry Cola, a color that's just as underrated as the drink it was named after, although I do enjoy Vanilla Coke a little bit better. What I like about this color is it clearly brings red into the mix, which is passionate and exciting, but it's so deep and shaded, you almost get a dash of deep burgundy, a slight hint of purple as well. It's just a fun, interesting color that you don't see used as often, especially within modern interiors. I think it's more fun than going with a much darker taupe, for example, which is kind of the low-hanging fruit, sort of the obvious choice. But why not go with a deep, dark, rich crimson red, just as another option? If we're talking baseboard paint colors, First Snow is a fun choice on the trim and baseboards, mainly because it has this lovely, fresh quality to it. And because the other paint colors all have a reasonable amount of depth, we're going with a soft off-white here instead of something more bright and stark, which will help create a more relaxed overall appearance on your woodwork, which I like. And if you didn't want to relax, maybe you wanted some drama on your trim, why not go with Off-Broadway? It's a color, see? You know, I was in New York recently and I finally realized that the only thing that determines whether something's on Broadway or off Broadway is the size of the theater/audience. Who knew? Anyway, this paint color is essentially a charcoal black in case you wanted to go for the complete opposite direction on your trim. Although my favorite use for it is on black interior doors. I'll leave it up to you whether you want to continue it onto the frames around it or just leave them white for some more contrasty vibes. I guess it depends on how busy the rest of the space is. But anyway, here's the palette all together. Let me know what you think. And here's another one for your viewing pleasure.